much. It's a pleasure and an honour to be here. And I'd like to talk to you about the research which I've conducted, and particularly the pull-through and the impact of that research over almost 10 years now. A journey which started off when I was a Ministry of Defence human scientist and has quite thankfully continued into my academic career. So I continue that theme and have had the luxury of seeing the pull-through from these research programs. Just to demonstrate intent, right from the beginning of this work, we worked very closely with colleagues through the American College of Sports Medicine, and this is a research strategy for injury prevention, which has been adopted certainly in the US and Canada, and has been published in a recent article. And certainly the strategy and the philosophy I followed right from the beginning was to conduct surveillance research to really quantify the size and nature of the problems and the effect that it had on the organisation, conduct further in-depth epidemiological research to identify the risk factors which were causing certain conditions within these populations, and obviously related to that, to identify the ones which we perceived to be modifiable, risk factors that we felt that we could modify and work with to reduce risk and reduce the incidence of these conditions among military populations. Then to go on and conduct controlled intervention studies to establish cause and effect before informing policy and working closely with organisations, and in this case particularly the British Army. I've had the pleasure of sitting on a number of advisory boards, particularly the Training Exercise Medicine Advisory Group, which advises Surgeon General within the Ministry of Defence on how to implement evidence and take forward policy based on evidence. As I say, put in monitoring procedures so that we can look at the true efficacy of these changes in policy and programs over time. So when we started this journey back in 2001, 2002, we were in a very dire situation really, where reports were suggesting that almost half of the military population during initial training were sustaining some form of musculoskeletal injury. About 1,000 of these each year would be medically discharged because their injuries were so severe that they couldn't be rehabilitated within a relatively short space of time. So you're starting to see a picture emerging already of the huge financial burden of the primary and secondary care costs associated with these conditions, and also these potentially career-threatening injuries and associated medical discharges for these young individuals. So about 70% of these injuries were directly attributable to what we now believe to be avoidable overuse training injuries. And associated with that, we also had approximately 100 trainees per year succumbing to exertional heat illness and sometimes the more severe form, heat stroke. Otherwise healthy individuals being admitted to hospital and sometimes resulting in a fatality. So some really significant both financial and personal individual considerations. You can see from the figure below that around 73% of all of these medical discharges due to overuse injury were associated with lower limb injuries, and particularly injuries at the knee and below. We're talking anterior knee pain, stress fractures, and the more significant forms, as well as I say, the occasional very unfortunate fatality due to exertional heat illness. So this was the sort of severity and size of the problem that we were dealing with. So the epidemiological research that we conducted identified particularly females being at up to 9 times greater risk of suffering a musculoskeletal injury and a medical discharge associated with it compared to the male population. And further research revealed that this was largely attributable to a 25% average lower level of cardiopulmonary fitness, which was predisposing them to these types of injuries, but obviously at significant risk. The detailed research which followed demonstrated that the main reason for this is that these female trainees were being trained in male-dominated large platoons, and they were essentially being overtrained because they were having to, the cardiovascular strain, the strain which they were experiencing during training was too great a stimulus for them to adapt. So that was an issue we needed to try and manage. We also demonstrated that generally, particularly during arduous training, the training load needed to be managed better and made more progressive during initial military training, allowing the body to adapt naturally physiologically. We also had to target this group of individuals who had been selected into the army, but in the lowest 20%, lowest quintile of aerobic fitness levels, who seem to be, again, at a much greater risk and up to 3 times greater risk of medical discharge. And then we've got the heat stroke problem to deal with. So just very quickly then, the gender streaming initiative, by just simply training all of our female trainees in one place in single-sex platoons, resulted in almost a 2-fold decrease in the incidence of overuse injuries, which resulted in medical discharge. We didn't see differences in defects on enlistment, pre-existing injuries prior to training. We didn't see any differences, and we weren't expecting to, in acute accidental injuries, but in overuse training injuries, a significant difference. We introduced a 3-week soldier preconditioning course to try and cater for those individuals with the lowest levels of aerobic fitness. We didn't see any difference in their aerobic fitness scores between selection and arriving for training, but just this 3-week intervention increased their aerobic fitness, their 1.5-mile run time in this case, by around 8%, increased their performance in local muscular endurance tests, and as a consequence, we were again able to almost halve the medical discharge rates due to overuse injury among this population. So allowing them to cope with training when they eventually arrived there after this 3-week preconditioning program. We did some intervention work with the parachute regiment recruits, who at the time, only 43% of them were actually making it through training injury-free. We completely redesigned their program by working closely with the chain of command. We introduced a 4th meal to trainees to try and make up the deficit. These individuals were expending about 4,500 calories per day during training, and they were being fed just over 3,000 from the cookhouse. So there's a huge energy deficit which their body was trying to cope with whilst it was trying to adapt to training. So they needed this 4th meal to cope with that. And as a consequence, we increased their pass rates from 43 to 58%, and we reduced their medical discharge due to overuse musculoskeletal injury by almost 3-fold. We've started working with this relatively new device which measures core body temperature responses to exercise using a telemetry pill. These pills transmit a core body temperature response every 20 seconds. So we're starting to really understand the type of thermal strain which the human can tolerate during real-life exercises. This work we did at the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst, we introduced a 15-minute command task partway through this event, which basically allowed time for the core body temperature to cool. And over the course of just 1 year, we completely eradicated serious heat stroke casualties at the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst, just through these simple practical interventions informed by strong evidence. So just to summarise, medical discharge due to overuse injury among females has reduced almost 4-fold from 2001 to the present day. Medical discharge due to musculoskeletal injury among males has been reduced almost 2.5-fold, largely due to the type of soldier preconditioning programs and attention to detail in terms of training progression. The parachute regiment trainees, we've increased their pass rates by 15%, allowing more of them to reach the front line injury-free, and reduced their medical discharge rates almost 3-fold. And as I said, the incidence of exertional heat illness has almost been completely eradicated at the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst. I can't take complete credit for all of those things. We had to work hard with these organisations and various people within it in order to make these things happen. In terms of what we're doing now, we're doing some further work on the pathophysiology of exertional heat illness. Why are some people more susceptible than others? Why are some people susceptible on some occasions compared to others? It seems to be a very transient condition. We believe that there may be a role for pre-exercise diets in preventing exertional heat illness. And we also have some evidence now that it may be related to the use of non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs like ibuprofen prior to exercise. We're also doing some work on the effects of lifestyle habits, and particularly smoking, on the adaptations to military training, and to see if there are ways we can better protect smokers and educate them in smoking cessation. They tend not to listen to long-term health messages, these recruits, so what we're trying to do is create the more short-term messages which are related to their performance and their ability to perform as a British Army soldier. I'm also pleased to say that we're just applying for a knowledge transfer partnership with the UK Fire and Rescue Service to develop occupational fitness standards and operational fitness standards which are associated with minimum acceptable performance of fire and rescue tasks. And we've just completed some work with the British Library looking at the ability to work in low oxygen environments. I'm being led to believe that more and more of these low oxygen storage facilities are being built around the country for a number of reasons, but predominantly because it's almost impossible to ignite a fire in a 14.8% oxygen environment, which sounds fantastic, and these facilities are incredible, but I don't think much thought went into the ability of engineers to work in these facilities before they were built. So we're now doing some in-depth work and we're engaging the HSE now in how we might be able to inform safe systems of work with them. So thank you very much for listening.